Everyone, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending upon where you are. My name is Aqeel Haider. I'll be talking about governance in a hybrid environment. In the case of Office 365, as companies are moving to Office 365 and their content leaves their traditional data centers and so forth. We have a lot to cover. Typically, this is a 75-minute session condensed today to 50 minutes. I'll be going through a lot of content. If you have follow-up information or questions, please feel free to reach out. A brief introduction about myself. I'm currently the VP of Technology for Office 365 and Azure practices at Zerantian. My contact information is listed up above. And traditionally, I grew up as a senior SharePoint architect all the way back to SharePoint 2001. I don't like owning that, but that is where we all started. The agenda of today's discussion is going to cover what is governance in order to implement a governance plan for your organization. What kind of resources do you need, including a governance team? And what's a good balance around governance? Workloads that you have to govern in Office 365. And as you heard Tapper mention in the keynote this morning, all the security capabilities in Office 365 that are available to you regarding governing your content. So we've got a lot to cover, as I said, and I'll come back to Q&A towards the end of the session. If any questions pop up during the discussion, please feel free to post them in the channel, and we'll try to answer them as we switch between topics. So basically, it is what is governance. I'm assuming everybody is agreed that we do need to govern our content, so I'm not going to go into why we need to govern our content. And then I'm going to cover what to govern and how to govern it, and what all the technology capabilities you have available at your disposal within your organization. So very textbook definition of governance. Basically, it's a set of policies, roles, responsibilities, and processes that control how an organization's business divisions and IT teams work together to achieve its goals. The key difference is that most of the times the environment, when you move to the cloud, you do not own the infrastructure. You do not have control over the back end of where your content is actually stored, whether it's Teams, whether it's Office 365, whether it's your email. So it's important to manage a governance plan and streamline it to the different technology solutions. It's what do I mean by that? You need to be able to map use cases of exactly what technologies you are going to use for what business problems that you're trying to solve, so that you can then appropriately turn on and off features and can appropriately govern the environment. It's very important to do that up front, and to be very and to do that, you should conduct some sort of an assessment or a discovery phase before you even go to the cloud. I know a lot of people would have already moved to the cloud, so in that instance, in case you might not have that capability, but it's always a time. There's always time to take a pause and conduct this activity. Obviously, the ROI piece is self-evident that if you actually have a governance plan, you can have a repeatable, consistent experience. People get content that they need to get to do their jobs, and the system is secured, keeping you away from lawsuits, data loss, and all of that. And as you heard today in the keynote, The DLP capabilities are now extended across the entire spectrum of Office 365 tool sets. So we're going to talk about that later in the discussion. But before you can implement a governance plan, you need to understand that every organization, regardless of size, regardless of corporate structure, government regulations, or what have you not, needs to have a governance team. And it can be expensive when you are in a highly regulated industry, or it can be very limited to just one or two people if you're in a smaller organization. It all depends on your specific organizational structure and need, but the idea is that you have to have a governance team defined. It could be a role played by multiple people with multiple roles, as the next slide will indicate. And it's a high touch system. If you look at Microsoft Teams itself, there is a chat capability, there is a calendaring capability, there is a file storage capability. So you have all these different aspects that you have to understand and define a governance plan to govern. When I say a practical governance plan, I do not mean that you lock it down to the point it becomes unusable, but you have to understand how to configure the tools so that you can secure your content. For example, if somebody in the chat starts typing a credit card number, the system should be self-aware that it can grab it and quarantine it, notify the administrator, and take appropriate action. So what comprises a governance team? The first thing we have to understand is that you have to have executive stakeholder buy-in. It's imperative that stakeholders within the organization, within the divisions, within the departments are all bought into this idea that they have to govern their content, and because they are going to be held accountable for it. Obviously, you're going to need some technical specialists, but more so you're going to need people to train your end users and other people so that they can appropriately govern, show and train people on how to manage their content in this diverse environment. When I say diverse, in the old days, you had one SharePoint environment and you used to upload files to a repository, or you had your own My Site. All that is gone. You have OneDrive for Business, you have Teams, you have SharePoint, you have Sway, you have Stream, you have so much of capability and availability of content. I've just even narrated just a few of them, and we're gonna go into all of those as the discussion gathers momentum. There is absolutely a need to have a compliance officer involved. Now, a lot of times organizations that are small don't have that, but at the end of the day, these are roles, not necessarily people. And as long as people know that they have to play that role within an organization, a governance team can be put together successfully to govern Office 365. Let's talk a little about we talked about what it is. Now we need to talk about why, what is the intent of putting this policy together. One, it will very clearly articulate within an organization and within your professional environment what each of these service loads is going to provide. So if you're going to use a particular technology for collaboration, then it's going to be very clear. If you're going to use SharePoint as a records repository, it's going to be very clear in the governance plan of what that is, what that means. It will also include service level agreements for each service. Obviously, you are moving to a cloud shared platform. You are going to be bound by the SLAs defined by Microsoft. But within those SLAs, you will have to satisfy your business requirements to ensure business continuity and also to ensure data consistency. And you can't do that if you haven't actually sat down and defined those as well. What are your RPOs and RTOs? What is going to happen if somebody accidentally deletes a file? What are all the different scenarios if data leakage happens, and what are the risk mitigation strategies around it? Just to name a few. The last but least, as I mentioned, is prevention instead of reaction. So the idea is to get ahead of the 8 ball and not behind it. If data has leaked or data has been compromised, or if content has been misused or something has been done that is against corporate policy and you're reacting to it, you're already too late. So the idea is to form this governance group, communicate the policies, and encourage the use of the governance policy. It should a snippet of it printed out should be on every wall in a physical office and on the background somewhere on your team structure or so forth. So people know that, hey, it's not okay, like somebody said this morning in the keynote, that it's not okay to have disparaging conversation about somebody in a corporate environment. And if that's happening, you should be able to catch it, track it, take rectifying action against it. The other key thing that most people don't realize is that when they go to Office 365, it takes them time. Organizations exist in this hybrid mode where part of their data is on-prem or it's in their data centers and part of the data is in Office 365. So all of this introduces significant change within organizations. It's important that the one thing that most people miss is that they don't define how to manage change within their organization. And people think that that's a separate topic outside of governance. No, I'm talking specifically on how anything that you do that will automate a business process, that improves the way people do things, you have to have a security and a governance policy behind it. And it's important that you actually understand this and define it, because this is where most organizations fail. The success of Office 365 is its own failure as well. Because people don't spend time configuring the tool or securing the tool or configuring the tools that are available as part of the suite, the end result is that people, it has a negative impact on user adoption. People will right-click send attachments, people will forward emails. All that stuff will happen if you don't actually sit down and define a policy to govern this change management and train people accordingly. I put this down there to showcase a very important point of how things have changed over the last decade or so. In the old days of SharePoint, as I mentioned, you used to have something, as I said, a very top-down traditional design pattern. You would have a corporate portal, you would have divisional portals, and people would have those very tightly locked down. And at the end of the day, what had happened with that approach would be that it just became a dumping ground for documents, or it became a communication portal where people would just go to get news and other information about the company. Because it was not fluid, it was very tightly locked down, old administrators like me would actually have an approach of shutting everything down and then going and opening up only features that were needed and then regulating it to death, which resulted in low user adoption. And you had group sites and team sites and projects and workspaces and personal sites that were lightly governed. And honestly, people didn't even care about what content was in there because you knew it was sitting on your on-prem servers. You could audit it at any time and so forth. Well, not anymore. When you go to the cloud, the approach has changed. As I mentioned earlier, it depends upon the tool within the suite of what use case you're using it for that determines how you're going to govern that content. if it's content in OneDrive for business, how do you ensure people are not sharing files outside your organization so that your IP isn't leaving? How do you not, if you turn on guest access in MS Teams, how do you make sure that anything marked with a retention label internal is not accidentally shared in an external team? So things like configuring MS Teams, controlling who can create teams, retention labels, automatic policies governing those retention labels, and so forth are very important. And I'm going to cover those as we go into each of those discussions. But the idea is it's no longer top down. It's dependent upon the tool that you're using, and then a matrix sort of a situation where you're configuring the capabilities within your Office 365 tenant to monitor it, to take rectifying action against it, and to ensure that there is no DLP happening, data loss happening in your environment. These are not all of them, but these are some of the key solutions, key workloads in Office 365 that you have to be aware of. I'm going to cover additional ones around the security capabilities in O365 as we go towards the tail end of the conversation. But let's start with the workloads. Obviously, SharePoint is the first obvious one. It's important that you understand what the boundaries and limitations of SharePoint Online are. It's important that you create a site provisioning process so you can audit who has access to what sites. It's important that you, during this provisioning process, you have checks and balances and in place that can validate that this is a genuine request and you're not willy-nilly creating SharePoint sites for the heck of it. And I'm not even going into the classification of the sites, which is communication sites, hub sites, standard old team sites, and all of that. Obviously, that is expected that you're going to have that in there in the site classification strategy. So if you have a use case for, let's say, project, do you use a MS Teams for a collaboration or do you use a project site? You have to have that in place. Of course, you have to have site policies in place. How long does the site exist for? When does something become a record? What happens when a certain, let's say, personal PII data is accidentally uploaded? And of course, in the old days, we used to have site collection naming. It's important to still have that policy in place because if you're going to deploy SharePoint Online as a hybrid environment, it's going to talk to your on-premise servers and you can't have conflicts. So if there's content that is sitting on-premise and you're migrating to online and the two environments are talking to each other, it's important to have a site collection naming capability, policy in place. When you deploy SharePoint as a hybrid service, you get a lot of choices. You get a lot of, there is a significant improvement from Microsoft on the two environments knowing about each other. That is both good and bad. I'll give you a tactical example. We were deploying a SharePoint solution at a customer and they were regulated by the government in such a manner that no XYZ type of data could leave their on-prem SharePoint 2016 environment. And not 19, they were on 16. And that was being connected to the hybrid environment in SharePoint Online Cloud. And well and dandy, we defined everything, the customer defined everything. This content goes there, this content goes there. Everything was great. What they didn't do is they configured search in such a manner that the search index was in the cloud. So it was connected to the SharePoint Online, from the SharePoint Online environment to the SharePoint on-prem environment. And as a result, that content was getting indexed in the cloud. When this customer got audited by the federal government, they got slapped a huge $10 million fine. That's exactly the kind of stuff that you cannot allow or happen. And you have to think about all these different things when you're deploying a hybrid SharePoint environment. Which sites are going to sit where? Where is your OneDrive for Business going to be? If content is sitting in the cloud and the DLP solution from Office 365 is being configured, what happens if somebody is on the on-prem environment and clicks on something that sits in the cloud? How do you trace that capability? What about managed metadata? If your managed metadata service is sitting in the cloud, which is awesome, and it can index content, add tags across both the environments, that's great. But now your content is getting, on-prem content is getting tagged in the cloud. Is that allowed? Okay, if it is, if it's not, you have to figure out some other solutions and we can talk about that. The next thing that is very important to consider is OneDrive for Business. When you are deploying a SharePoint hybrid environment or you are deploying a SharePoint Online environment, there is a significant integration between OneDrive for Business, including Exchange and Teams. A lot of this was hyped up by Microsoft. We end up with around 1 terabyte of storage for every user. And now this thing travels with the user's identity. I can log in from my personal phone and get access to my OneDrive. Okay, great. But if you haven't configured Intune and you haven't defined your governance policy, if I leave the organization, those things will leave with me. You should be able, as the administrators, to wipe that data selectively from the person's phone based upon your policy definition. These are just some tactical examples to make the reality of thinking about all the different things that you have to think about. Policy, conditional access, external sharing and syncing and quotas. What is your policy around syncing to non-corporate devices, for example? Do you allow it? Do you not allow it? Is it possible to control? The answer is yes, but you have to be aware that you have to come up with all these things. External sharing is a big one. A lot of times I personally love external sharing because if I have to share a file with Galen or Joel or any of my peers, guess what? I put it in my OneDrive, I hit share and I share it with anyone on Office 365. Great. I know what I'm doing, but does a person down the road in my department or in some finance department doesn't know what they're doing and accidentally shares company financials externally? So we have to put some controls around this, and there are those available now with what we call labels. We'll get into that in a second. The other thing is user management and delegation. If you actually have an organization where people are delegated within your organization to, our president has a administrative assistant who has access to his email. The assistant by default also has access to all the files in OneDrive. The other day, she knew everybody's salary. So these are the kind of things you have to think about. And obviously this didn't happen in Oregon. I'm just giving you a anecdotal scenario that can potentially develop. But these are the kind of things that you run into that you have to be aware of, which weren't there when you were on premise. Stream is another example of this. Stream again, and the funniest thing is that all the different tools from Microsoft have all different types of ways when you can share things. Right now, sharing streaming videos outside the organization is not there, at least from the last time I checked. The Microsoft product group is saying that they're going to bring in external sharing for that. Again, great feature to have when you're doing presentations like these. You want to share the recordings with customers. You want to share the recordings with external resources. but you can't. But what happens during that recording or during that meeting if some internal information leaves your organization? How do you secure it? What are the key integration points? What happens if somebody right clicks, downloads the file on their OneDrive and then shares it out? All these are considerations that you have to be aware of, and policies and procedures that you have to come up with to either selectively open these things or selectively close these things. And if you close them, you have to have an explanation and an alternative solution available. We'll get to that in a minute. A lot of people on this call must have heard a lot about Office 365 groups. It's basically a subscription-based membership to controlling what users have access to, what tools, what they can then specifically do with those tools, and the rights that they have within those tools. For example, in my organization, we have an Office 365 group that you must belong to in order to provision a team. Not everybody can do that. Similarly, you might have other groups within your environment. So it's very important to have a policy in place to govern the groups and also to manage them and then to retire them. I've gone into organization where it has become a mushroom cloud of 800 groups of the same, and 400 of them do the same thing. So you have to have usage guidelines, data classification. You have to have policies around who can create them, what your retention policies are going to be, what your labels are going to be, and then what your guest access is going to be associated with that label. So if you create a team marked internal, for example, then external resources cannot be invited to it. And all of that can be configured if you provide if you A, create these policies and then B, implement them. Briefly going to talk about Planner. The reason I brought up Planner is because it's being used a lot within teams to do task management. And what most people don't realize is that if you have external team members, notification and task organization goes out to them with all the meeting notes. Be aware of it. It is important to have some thought put into that. This is the big one. I am going to spend a little bit of time on this just to cover because it's got a lot of features that you have to think about. So the first thing, and I do an entire 2-hour session on governing teams. I'm not going to even try to cover everything here. That's not the scope of this discussion today. But you have SharePoint, Power BI, Office Online, Planner. You have all of the suite of Office tools like OneNote. Everything is coming together in Teams. You have the ability to do whiteboarding sessions. You have the ability to share documents. You have the ability to collaborate. If you think about it, it's a wrapper around the entire suite of Microsoft technologies. It is absolutely imperative that you sit down and define a team's governance plan. You have to understand that you have 20 different use cases of teams. In the old days, if somebody didn't have access externally to your internal SharePoint environment, it would be fine. But now, if you invite an external guest into your team, he or she will have access to that site behind it and that team. So if you don't secure your content or you don't apply governance policies, there is a huge risk to data loss within an organization. More so, you need to also be able to audit and provide reports on the sanctity and the and the viability of all the content in Teams. There are all these capabilities available in the governance, the DLP, Teams, and other admin modules within your admin center. Yammer is the other big one. I love Yammer because we used to use it in our old paradigm where we used to have lots of threaded discussions. Now people ask me, well, shouldn't I have this? It's the same thing in chats in Teams. Well, yes and no. Yammer has its channels externally, internally, and so forth. Again, my conversation goes back to defining the use cases for which tools you are going to use for what purpose. The key integration points in Yammer are important to understand. The key identity management pieces around Azure information protection rights and so forth are also very important to understand here. But public groups that are easily discoverable, they enhance a lot of collaboration, but then your content is visible outside. Again, my central theme of this entire discussion. Need to have a policy, have to understand all the capabilities of Yammer, and then the impact to the environment. So I'm going to, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on Delve. There's an entire wonderful session on Delve, and there's a great discussion on content that surfaces through machine learning. Needless to say that thanks to role-based security, you only see content that you have access to. But if you give unintentional access to people or things, then your Delve profile will elegantly show that. It's important to understand what that is and who gets access to your information if they go to your Delve profile page. So please put a policy in place to govern that content. This morning, and we've had countless sessions on this, I'm sure there are wonderful speakers. My peers are talking eloquently on all the wonderful things that Power Apps is doing and the Power Platform is doing. And you are building these no-code, low-code solutions. You are having these wonderful capabilities. If the content is sitting in the CDS, or if it's sitting in SharePoint repositories, or as a Canvas app versus a model-driven app, what is the impact of that? It is important to understand that once you build these apps, they can be accessed through your mobile device. You can actually publish them so that interactions can happen on the Power App platform on your mobile device. So it's important that you actually have a policy around all of this. It's also very, very important to understand that if you don't actually understand where this content is going, you could potentially lose content and data through an unintentional action of somebody approving something and them not knowing what they have actually done. So it's important, you should be able to audit all actions. So if somebody is approving a request and you guys get audited, you should be able to surface that information. Again, policy is needed, process is needed behind this tool. Again, on Power Automate, the same thing. If a workflow is executing and you need to provide reports on it, again, it can interact with multiple systems. That's the whole key thing about it. It can talk through connectors with external systems. It can pull that data in. It can push that data out. If you need to be able to share with your power users on all these capabilities, but more so, how are you going to manage, control, and that entire data lifecycle, user lifecycle, and content lifecycle? We have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to try to, this is not the latest information, of course. Microsoft has recently released updated information on all the different capabilities. Please go to TechNet to get the latest one. This is updated as of about couple of months back when I put this content together. The idea is to let you guys know of all the different tools that you have available in order to secure the content in all the different workloads that we just discussed. So the first thing that we need to cover is, of course, data loss prevention. It is certainly very important to have a clear understanding of what is possible in a DLP scenario, what pre-built policies come with it, how can you create retention labels to and apply them to data, what are all the different sensitivities that can be implemented such that across the platform now. The limitation was in Teams, you couldn't do it. And this morning in the keynote, you heard that now it is possible. So it's important that you actually build your data loss prevention policies and protect your sensitive data. Also understand that you should have a policy around custom actions and conditional access points defined. So if something bad happens, let's say that I accidentally upload a credit card number, what action is going to take? Am I going to block the content and or send a notification? Or am I going to tell the person, hey, are you sure you want to do this? If it's an internal site, I have to maintain people's salaries and their socials and all of that. Okay, great. But what are the notifications and or encryptions that I have to apply to that content? Will the users have the ability to override it or not? In certain use cases, yes. In certain use cases, no. And you have to define that within your organization. Rights management or IRM. Now, the screenshot is a little dated, but the idea is the same. It can provide you exact level of control over what people can do. If you have a rights management module configured, and I'm not even going into licensing of what you need to have some of these features, that's a whole different discussion. But it's very important to define this so that people can't willy-nilly forward stuff. People can't willy-nilly download stuff onto their personal devices and share them with outside the organization. And you should have control over what you can and will allow and will not allow during this process. Retention. Typically, a lot of people used to think about retention as an okay, I'll give the standard use case that there is a 7-year process around retention policies that content is automatically deleted after 7 years. Yeah, that's fine. That's a deletion policy. And that is there. You can create it. You can apply labels to it. You can attach to different things and it will take care of all of that. The other key thing to know about is preservation policy. So if you have certain keywords that take place within a document, the preservation policy can automatically be applied to that content. It can be modified and applied days, months, year. And if the content is deleted by the user or by some other action, you can have it preserved in a secure repository. This is great for legal firms. It's great for hospitals and other HIPAA compliant requirements. Again, depends upon your specific use case. Device management. In the old days, everybody used to be issued a company laptop. You used to have to VPN in, and that was the only way you could get to your SharePoint site. Well, those days are gone. That's the entire purpose of moving to the cloud. You have the capability with Intune and other Office 365 capabilities where you can remotely manage at the app level as well as the device level what do you want to do with the selective content that is available to consumers, whether they can get to the get to the site and what they can actually do with that content on that device. It's important to have this. You can you can control it at the IP level. You can allow access. Apps that don't, use modern authentication, you can limit a lot of things and a lot of actions people can do. And you can ensure that if the person, and if BYOD is your policy and they leave, that you actually have the ability to wipe that person's, not their entire device, which you could do, but selectively wipe the content related to your organization's content so that you're not harming that other person as well. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on auditing. Needless to say that at almost every single action that is done on a tenant is fully auditable by default for the past 90 days. Now you can increase it. You can actually have hybrid auditing available if you have a hybrid environment, and on-premise version is also now available. So you can have the scope of that audit control defined to whatever level you want, and you can add alerts to it as well. This is very, very important if you have external auditors when it comes to your financial institutional organizations and other organizations, if you are using SharePoint and MS Teams to store content. And there's an entire session that I, again, do on auditing that we can have a more detailed discussion on. Anyways, the point here is that you need to have a policy that governs how content will be audited, what will be audited, and how often it will be audited. And then you need to configure the tool to adhere to that policy. Last but not least is the eDiscovery module. This is a excellent module that comes as part of Office 365. It can allow you to create legal holds for everything in the entire tenant, for sites, mailboxes, Teams. I don't know if it's there for Teams there or not, but I was told it is. So I haven't tested it for that, but I've been told it is. So it is there, I assume. I'll have double check with the product group on that. But it's very simple to assign permissions to a case, apply a legal hold, and then take actions that are required to avoid litigation and all these things. The tool has the capability to perform all these actions. It's up to you to first define the policies that you need in order to manage this, and then you need to work with a SharePoint architect or Office 365 architect to implement those. Last but not least, you can obviously export the results so that if you have to present them outside your organization, you can do so. And that applies to the auditing piece as well. I think I am good on time. I rushed through a lot of content. I would like to take this opportunity now to, in the last 5 minutes that we have, to switch to any questions that we have. Did we have any questions at all? Oh, there we go. Sorry, now I'm seeing there are some published questions. All right. Let's start. Oops. I don't know, these might not be related to my session. Some of these are related to other sessions, I think. So, yep, I don't see any questions here in the channel. Galen, anything on your end? Do you see anything? No, the last one was at 3. Are topics created for? Yep. Okay. Nope. Awesome. Great. Well, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for attending.